I'll go ahead and introduce the next speakers. We have Mike Durran and Brendan Doyle are going to be speaking about embedding Oracle Analytics, democratize your data and make it transparent for all. And they're going to talk through this. I'll put up the slide, and with this, Brendan, I'll turn things over to you. Make sure you can share your screen and turn things over to you.
Sounds good. Thanks, Dan. And let me make it full screen. Cool. I think that's full screen, right?
Looks good.
Perfect. All righty. So I'll just jump right in. So today we'll be talking to you about embedding Oracle Analytics and democratizing your data and making it transparent for all. Really, the ability to embed your analytics from Oracle Analytics Cloud is very useful in a number of scenarios that we'll touch on. And we'll also discuss in this session how to perform embedding of your Oracle Analytics content, starting with a basic example and then covering some of the end process of actually creating content in OAC and embedding it publicly. So a quick just glance at our safe harbor, stating that what we're showing today can be subject to change, but this is just a quick glance at that. As Dan mentioned, I'm Brendan Doyle from the Oracle Analytics Product Strategy team, and today I'm joined by my colleague Mike Durran, who's a senior principal for the product management team, and he'll give you a good demo coming forward. So with all great superhero stories, there's usually an origin story. And Oracle Analytics is the same in this regard. So as Tony Stark referred to Larry Ellison as the Oracle of Oracle in Iron Man 2, Larry delivered our new mission statement at Oracle Open World this past year about where the company is going and how we'll get there. And through product changes, updates, rebranding, Oracle has really stuck to this guiding principle that our mission is to help people see data in new ways, discover insights, and unlock endless possibilities. And that's really what we're trying to deliver here with this embedding analytics topic. But if it was up to me, I would stop the mission statement after the first 6 words, as the rest really follows. Our mission is to truly help people. So what are we going to cover today? Let me just show you the bullets there. Today we plan to answer questions around what embedded analytics is, why you should embed your analytics to democratize your data publicly, and how to actually go about doing it. And then we'll conclude with some examples and demos of the publicly embedded analytics to show you what's already out there. So to start, what is embedded analytics? Before I jump into the depth of that, I want to share it earlier, I guess, on the call today as well, but I want to share a great community-driven resource being our Oracle Analytics Sandbox. The link is here on the screen as well as in the chat. And this is where our community has created and uploaded great data stories, visualizations to demonstrate the types of visuals that can be done in Oracle Analytics. But this may leave you to say, these are really cool examples, but I need the ability to include Oracle Analytics visualizations in a custom web page portal application. And you obviously want to get your creations out there. Now you can. So you can embed in your company web page, your portal and applications, as I mentioned, and embed these into third-party applications as well. So continuing on with what embedded analytics is, embedded analytics is taking content from Oracle Analytics and embedding it seamlessly into somewhere else. The main focus here in doing so is on consumption and truly using the content. It's not just creating new content, but in fact, making pre-generated content available elsewhere for a much larger audience to consume and learn from. It provides insights into your data to a crowd that may not typically have access, and thus opening up opportunities for more decisions to be made off of the data. Now, let's say you created a custom consumer experience in the data visualization aspect of Oracle Analytics, where you created a data set or a connection, you analyzed your data, and you viewed your analysis in the narrate mode. Now, the idea to embed that content somewhere else outside of your Oracle Analytics instance provides you an opportunity to really tailor your user experience, one, to allow more users to interact with the visuals and build their muscle around interpreting visualized data via the embedded analytics content in the application. And the second main thing is it really enables access to data for public access with embedding analytics. It's by putting it in a public site, it provides that automatic authentication to OAC as everything's done kind of behind the scenes for you. Now I'm going to share a little more on why you should embed analytics and democratize your data. So to start, growing the public access and adoption to data is a key element to really build your customer satisfaction. Specifically, by doing so, customers will have more readily available methods to discover insights and understand their data. So democratizing data also leads to a better understanding for the laypersons who may not be data analysts or data scientists, but giving them an opportunity to really consume analyses as well as the data associated. And I think a major one that we're all aware of is with the impact of COVID, the visualizations that are updated daily and automatically with the freshest counts and spikes in occurrence. So that's really brought in a new wave of understanding of the importance of data visualization and democratizing your data globally. By providing a broader view to insights in the data, it improves operations for several industries as well, such as creating better patient outcomes and reducing friction regarding supply chain. So obviously, the more eyes on the curated insights leads to smarter decisions across the board. Continuing on with democratizing your data, it's crucial for things, and I'll touch on in a moment, but like responding to national emergencies or global emergencies and supporting social causes, which I'll share coming forward. And lastly, I want to emphasize as well is by democratizing your data, it also allows for a source of truth, both for global citizens to get data-backed understandings, as well as stakeholders as members of a company so they can make their decisions for the business and what they're going to do as a stakeholder. I mentioned in the previous slide the importance of a global response to emergencies, and the Oracle Analytics team, as well as the Oracle Apex team, they came together to really democratize the COVID-19 and medical data in response to the pandemic. Oracle donated what's called the Therapeutic Learning System to the Department of Health and Human Services. In this system, it's an online platform designed to collect real-time medical data related to COVID-19. This safe and secure platform provides doctors and other clinicians real-time information about how patients are doing around the country and how they're responding to possible therapeutics to treat COVID-19. So really, to a global scale, to democratize this data, you'll see from the bottom left side, just the sign-in page. So if you are a health practitioner, you can go right in and share the data that you have and become part of this global understanding of this democratized data to really support the greater good. Another initiative more around the social impacts of democratizing data is around what Oracle is doing with the World Bee Project. And this is important as I like to pull, I'm a big quote person, so I'll pull another quote. Albert Einstein was quoted saying, if the bee disappeared off the surface of the globe, then man would only have 4 years left to live. No more bees means no more pollination, no more plants, and no more animals, and then in turn, no more man. So the World Bee Project Hive Network, it remotely collects data from varying environments through interconnected hives using IoT sensors. These sensors combined colony acoustics, monitoring other parameters such as the temperature of the hive, its humidity, and the weight of the hive, and other conditions that are pulled from public data, such as weather data. They also monitor and interpret the sound of the bee quality to assess the colony's behavior, its strength, and its health. One of the visualizations that was created off of that around this harmonic analysis that's shared as to beekeepers, farmers, and scientists is a specific one. So it's looking at the acoustic data, and you can tell an enormous amount about the behavior and the health of these bee colonies with relation to this hum that bees make. So for example, we're able to predict from the hum when a hive is likely to swarm and warn a beekeeper or a farmer. And for those, and I learned this as well as not being a beekeeper myself, a swarm is a perfectly natural occurrence that happens when bees outgrow their hive, and it involves about 2/3 of the bees leaving their queen and starting a new colony. So the problems or predicaments around this are that if a bee swarm is to leave at the wrong time of the year, for example, in winter, they're open to the threat of predators or disease. So the beekeeper is able to capture these swarms and steer them in the right direction in a proper new colony. So really being able to impact the larger picture by sharing data and making it transparent to all really allows the decision makers to make the proper decisions going forward and I guess in turn save the bees. Now I'm going to hand it over to my colleague Mike Durran, who's going to share more on how do we actually go about doing this and go about embedding their analytics. So Mike, I'll hand it off to you to take over.
Thanks, Brendan. Okay, so there can't be that many subjects where you go from talking about global pandemics to bees, but that's basically what analytics lets you do. So let's talk about how you actually embed the analytics content in wherever you like. So let's assume that you've got a project within Oracle Analytics with the relevant data and visualizations that you actually want to do the embedding with. So once you've got that project, you go to one of the menu options that I'll show you in a moment, and you copy a few lines of HTML and JavaScript code from that project into your own environment. So for example, you may have, I guess the hello world example would be like a simple HTML file, which you can then host on a web server. So we'll show you loads of examples of all these types of things as we go through the presentation. So Oracle Analytics uses an embedding framework. Oracle Analytics, the DV component, is based on a JavaScript framework called Oracle Jet. And that makes use of various different components to do the bindings of the data and to actually make sure that all the relevant modules are loaded. So you'll see in a moment that we have a few bits of code that we need just to take care of those aspects. And what Oracle Analytics itself provides is a web component. So we have a tag which is called Oracle/DV, and then that's referenced within the HTML page for whatever application you may be embedding the analytics into. So we've got the Oracle Analytics instance with our project. In terms of what types of skills you would need to do the embedding, you can do this with fairly basic web development skills, right through to the sky's the limit. And if you have already got advanced web development skills, so if you know a little bit of HTML, then you can all do some embedding. If you have a bit more experience with CSS, JavaScript, and going right through the spectrum of skills, then like I say, you can kind of do pretty much whatever you want. And I'll show you some examples of some custom applications that we've built and we've embedded analytics into. It's always useful to have a good sort of like text editor or an IDE, so something like Visual Studio Code or Atom. That will just kind of help you with formatting the code that you're writing, and you'll get a better understanding of actually what you're writing. One thing that you do need when you're developing this is a lightweight web server or HTTP server for development and testing. When you are embedding OAC content into somewhere else, you're basically building something which is going to have cross-origin sharing of that content. And as we know, the internet can be a place where people try to take advantage of security holes. So cross-origin sharing or CORS has a number of safeguards in place. So when you're doing your development of your embedded content, you need to run that from a server, so you can then tell the Oracle Analytics instance using the safe domains area of the console, this is a safe domain to embed OAC content into. If you directly access your HTML file that you're working on within a browser, then it won't work. So you actually do need to have some localhost web server running. And there's a number of ways of setting up a lightweight web server, download a patch, you get that running on your local system. Or if you're lucky, then you may have some space on your actual web server or a development web server where you can FTP or upload the files, which you can then use for testing. One thing to note is that sometimes I've spoken to people who are trying to do this embedding, and they may be running something like IIS locally on their laptop. Now, obviously, IIS is kind of a fairly sort of enterprise level web server, and what that means is that they're typically could be additional settings related to the cross-origin resource sharing, which you would also need to be aware of, or you may run into some problems there. Get to know the developer tools or console in your browser. Whenever you have any issues to do with web development, and in particular, if you're embedding OAC content into another web page or an application, then you may just see a blank page. If you open up the developer tools in your browser, you'll get an awful lot of information as to what's going on. So the console will give you error messages, and that can help us within development if we're working with you to solve a problem, as well as the networking tab can be useful as well, because then we'll see what actual calls and API calls are happening, so we can troubleshoot issues that way. But also, if you're just developing your own application or website, you can inspect certain aspects of that web page and look at the CSS and the various sort of styles that are being applied, and you can actually edit them directly within that console as well. So it's a great tool if you're working through the development of some kind of custom system like this. Sometimes the private mode on your browser can be useful for testing. The reason for that is because quite often if you open up a private browser, then it may be able to simulate not having any cookies locally. So you may want to try that if you're looking at any security or authentication type scenarios. And as you go through this process, you're going to gain some knowledge, more than likely, within Oracle IDCS, which is the Identity Cloud Service, which comes with Oracle Analytics Cloud. And that can be useful when doing things like some of the authentication options that I'll talk about in a moment. All right, so how do you do the basic embedding? So here we're looking at a screenshot of an Oracle Analytics project, and you can see I've gone to the top right hamburger menu and I've gone into the developer tab. So within there's a number of subtabs, and I'm focused on the embedding subtab. So you can see two things. The first thing is this script tag, and then what you'll see is a link to embedding.js. So I mentioned before that Oracle DB is based on the Oracle Jet kind of framework. And what we need to do is download some JavaScript when we do the embedding. So that downloads the JavaScript to the client at the time. You'll see we have a little tag there called embedding mode. Now, if you're embedding into a Jet application itself, you would swap that out for Jet. If not, then you would swap that out for standalone, and that's described along the top there. And then we have the Oracle DB tag. So this is the simple form of the Oracle DB tag, where we have the link to the project path. What you would see when you do that embedding, if you just reference the project path, is exactly what you saw when you saved that project the last time within OAC. You can see that we have a number of options here for the different canvases. And what that lets you do is reference a particular canvas within your embedded application. All right, so I'm going to show you some code now. So how does that translate into this kind of like idea of the most simple sort of form that you can do with embedding? So you can see that we have a HTML file, and we have the header section and the body section. Within the head section, we've got a reference to our embedding.js script. Just one quick point on troubleshooting. If you're having issues doing the embedding, just take this link and then put that into your browser, and you should see the JavaScript appear on your screen. If you don't see that JavaScript, then there'll be some issue, more than likely around authentication or something else, which will help us troubleshoot. And then in the actual body of the web page, you can see that we have the Oracle DB tag. And in this particular case, I'm referencing a particular canvas and active tab ID 1. And then at the bottom, we have the housekeeping bits, which is require.js, and then applied bindings, which is needed for the knockout components that Oracle DB uses. So this is actually, again, a screenshot of how that would then look if you access that file, that HTML file. And the great thing about this is that this is interactive. So the experiences as an end user that you have within Oracle Analytics, you have similar experiences when that canvas is embedded into your own project. So you can see that I have right mouse click functionality. I have keep and remove. I can do sorting. I can do drilling. I can also zoom on charts if the chart supports that. And I can do edit copy data if I wanted to put that somewhere else. So here's an example of the options that we have for sorting. So I'm just sorting that now, low to high. Optionally, you can show a filter bar. So the filter bar that you see in OAC, you can optionally turn that on or off within your embedded project. And here this allows me to add filters as needed. As Brendan mentioned at the start, the focus is on consumption. So any changes that you do make within an embedded project are not saved back into the catalog. They're not persisted. So if you refresh that page, you would get back to the starting point that you had. So when you're looking at designing content to embed, typically you may want to maybe match a theme to an existing application, or you may be looking just to be creative and create an application based on analytic data for some other reason. And analytics has got numerous tools nowadays for creating this type of theme. So you can change the color palette that you're using for the visualizations, the font size and the color, and you can add background colors as well as images. And you can get very creative with respect to what you're doing. So I have some examples. This is, if you've ever spoken to me about embedding, or I've helped you, then this is what we call dark theme. And we also have light theme. So these are just the same canvas, but applying different color schemes and color palettes to each of these different visualizations. As you get more into embedding and creating custom applications, it's also possible to programmatically apply filters into the embedded content. So here you can see our Oracle DV tag on the left-hand side has now got an additional parameter for filters, and then the knockout call, which is at the bottom of the HTML page, now provides a number of options related to that filter. So that means as you're building out your application, you could have, JavaScript drop downs, which then apply filters to the embedded content from Oracle Analytics. Now, in terms of getting a bit more advanced with your embedding, here's an example where we've taken a bootstrap, which is a JavaScript framework template, and then each of these cards has got a separate reference to an Oracle embedded canvas. And this is great because you can download these templates quite often for free, and they give you a good starting point towards building a totally custom application like this. So you can see we have a navigation section, and that can be collapsed. And you can try this out yourselves. So take a screenshot, or make a note of this URL, and subject to availability, this is just like a little sort of POC web server that I have running. You'll be able to access this particular example and have a play around with what you can do with embedding, and hopefully that will kind of be inspiring in terms of that. Here's another example where we've actually taken the same theme, but we've done a bit more changes to the design. But again, this is all referencing Oracle Analytics canvases, and each of these cards is an individual canvas. Now, in terms of how we created that custom application, as I say, so each of those cards is a single canvas, and that's a good sort of practice to try and give you good performance. You can choose suitable color schemes within the Oracle Analytics canvases to match the template that you're working with. And then what you want to do is take a look at a template, if that's how you've started, and try and understand how that's built, and then where you can embed the Oracle DV tag. So what I mean by that is, this is an example of one of those cards, and this is what it looked like from the template. And the code behind that was this. This is the HTML. So you can see there's a number of divs with the appropriate classes to give it that kind of look and feel. And then what we do is we take the Oracle DV tag, and we place that into the code that we just saw. So we place that into the appropriate part. And then what we see is that card, we've changed the size, we've changed the height, but you're now seeing the embedded OAC content directly within that card. And essentially you just go through that process, and you choose what sort of layout and what design that you'd like to see, and then you embed those Oracle DB tags in each of those areas to build it up so that you get your end results. And I have a blog where I've written up that process, if that's something that you're interested in doing. That also has links to the various templates that we used for that. So once you've created your application, you've designed it, you've got the look and feel that you'd like, how do you actually authenticate? So there is 3 main ways that you can do the authentication. The first one is just, you'll get a simple login prompt by default. The second one is if you're embedding content into a third-party application or third-party web application, you can use something called 3-legged authentication. And then if you're looking to do something which may be a little bit more complex, or even looking to create a public access to your analytics content, then you can use tokens. This is what it looks like for the login prompt. So you can see that you just click on that login link, and if you're a user of Oracle Analytics, you'd use your standard username and password, and then the application would light up for you. If you wanted to do the 3-legged approach, then on the left, you can see we have a user who's accessing a custom application. That custom application is typically going to be having an authentication provider, and Oracle Analytics Cloud on the bottom here is going to be using IDCS. So what you do is you federate those 2 authentication providers, and then using a config switch within that HTML that we were looking at earlier for embedding, you should then be able to log into your custom application or website, and then Oracle Analytics Cloud's content will be able to be authenticated as well, kind of like a sort of single sign-on, but using that federation. If you wanted to go down the route where you wanted to use tokens, and this, as I say, you can then get very flexible with respect to your authentication architecture. This particular schematic, which I've got set up for what we call the MetaCortex example I showed you earlier on, is actually making use of a function call, which runs in the Oracle Function Service, to call the IDCS API to get that token, and then the embedded content then makes an API call to that function to bring that token back, which is then passed through to Oracle Analytics Cloud to authenticate. In terms of some security considerations, so as I say, if your development is happening locally, typically on a local host, then if you happen to be logged into your OAC system on another browser tab, then it will share the cookies, and you'll be able to work quite happily that way. And then we have the 3-legged option and the token-based option, which I sort of described a moment ago. Now, in terms of troubleshooting, so I mentioned safe domains and the cross-origin resource sharing. Quite often, that's 99% of the time that could be the problem. And you can see we've got a screenshot of the safe domains tab within OAC. We find that that's quite often the issue, because literally you just sort of forget sometimes. And if you happen to be working with a number of domains, you may forget to put in the actual domain. So that's kind of the first thing to check, and more than likely the first thing to do really when you're actually doing some embedding. I've already mentioned how valuable the browser development tools, console, and network tabs can be, and making sure that this embedding.js script will actually resolve on your browser. If you're building an application, make sure that the content is available to all the users of the system that you have. And that more than likely will include putting it into the shared area of the analytics catalog. If you're embedding OAC content into a pre-built application or template, look out for any conflicts within the sort of styling within the 2 applications. And the last thing in terms of troubleshooting is just to be aware of any changes, be aware of changes that have happened recently to the Chrome and the Edge browsers. So they've tightened up the cookie definitions that are needed when you have content which is coming from different domains. If you do have those issues, please log an SR with us and contact me directly, and then we can work through getting the system patched appropriately so that issue goes away. There's quite an easy workaround as well if you do have that issue, until such time as the appropriate patches can be applied. So I've got some examples of where our customers have embedded analytics publicly. So the first one is the United States Sentencing Commission, and you may be able to recognize some of these visualizations as being sourced from Oracle Analytics, but as you can see, there's a series of filters on the left, as well as they've branded it. So you'd come here, and if you didn't have any experience with Oracle Analytics, you wouldn't necessarily know that this is actually using Oracle Analytics underneath the covers. Here's the URL, and you can put that URL into your browser and check this out yourself. Brendan, I think, also mentioned the idea of democratizing data and being able to share information with the public, which is important for them to be able to access. And the National Health Service here in the UK has a system, this called Catalyst, or as it says, it's a public insight portal, which they give you some public credentials. You can go into the analytics site and then do whatever analysis you need to. Obviously, it's quite specialist data for medical professionals, but they have used Oracle Analytics to make that information available. And as you can see, they've done that branding as well to kind of just make it look as though you're in an NHS application. In terms of additional sources of information, I've been, over time writing up various techniques and methods for doing embedding, and you can find my blog on Medium. It's called Insight to Action, but if you also kind of Google Medium Mike Durran, then you'll also be able to get to that link quite easily. We have product documentation, which describes how to do the embedding. And then, of course, our analytics YouTube channel is a great resource for that as well. So I'll take any questions. Brendan as well, we'll take any questions that there may be on this topic.
Yep, it looks like we have two so far, Mike. The first one being, how do we embed DVs into an Apex or a simple HTML portal?
Yeah, so there's certainly ways of doing that. When you're in the Apex IDE, for a given page, you'll see on the right-hand side that there'll be elements for putting in references to JavaScript, as well as putting in HTML. So what I've been showing you with respect to those JavaScript elements, you would put into the Apex sort of areas within that IDE. Well, get in touch with me directly, and I can send you some links to I think one of my colleagues created a video on YouTube with a walkthrough of how to do embedding into Apex. But yeah, get in touch, and I'll get you a bit more information on that.
Perfect. And then the next one is, what if we need to configure three-legged or token configuration in Oracle Analytics Server?
Okay, so that's an interesting one. So as I say, those methods of authentication we are able to describe because we know that OAC is working with IDCS. And if you're working with OAS, which is the on-prem version of Oracle Analytics, then, but by default, you're going to get WebLogic out of the box as your default authentication server. Typically, though, you may be working with some other authentication server. So you can look at what facilities they offer with respect to federation and perhaps even token generation as well from that side.
The next one that just came in is, can the Oracle Analytics charts be exposed as APIs, which can be called from the third-party apps?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite catch that last question.
Yep. Can the Oracle Analytics charts can they be exposed to APIs, which can be called from third-party apps?
Well, you can reference a visualization which you have on a canvas, and you can embed that into a third-party app. I'm not exactly sure that's what you're asking, but the way you've asked the question, the answer is no. But if it depends kind of what you mean by that. So yeah, feel free to get in touch with me directly, Abhijit, and we can discuss exactly the use case that you have.
And I'll share our emails in the chat as well for everyone to have.
Cool. Thanks, Brendan.
Thank you. All right, it seems we have no further questions. So
Brendan, I'm going to
thank
go
you.
ahead and ask a question. This is Dan.
Go for it.
Because it occurred to me as I was seeing Mike's presentation, and thank you so much. One of the things I wanted to like to know is, it occurs to me that when people are embedding analytics, they're in effect viewing it as anonymous user. How do you end up handling the security in terms of this person coming in as different personas? Is there a way to do that? And it looks like that's actually a way to share analytics without requiring a user ID, which is actually something we've run into with some of our clients. Can you address that, Mike?
Yeah. So when you connect to Oracle Analytics, you're always using a user ID. It's the perception that you would give the person accessing that site, if you wanted to make it available publicly, that they're going in as an anonymous user. Behind the scenes, you're actually in a secure way, you're authenticating, let's say, as a generic user. Typically that would be somebody who just has the consumer role and access to data that you're only happy to make available publicly. So it's, in some ways, it's it's kind of all the things that are making it appear as though you're going in anonymously are happening behind the scenes. So that's just one way of being able to implement the security. Typically, though, with an embedded system, you're going to have somebody logging in, and then the data that they would see would be relevant to their profile within the system. So both of those are easily possible to carry out. And if you wanted to go deeper into how to set up something which gave users public access, then obviously, Dan, we can take that offline and I can talk you through that.
Okay, thank you.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Mike, for accompanying me on this presentation. I'm going to share this